Silence, the kind that began with a closed-door meeting inside Kensington Palace, one so sensitive that even longtime aides were abruptly dismissed from the corridor outside. But it wasn't the silence that alarmed royal insiders. It was Princess Catherine's expression afterward, pale, shaken, almost frozen. Within hours, whispers spread through palace staff that the future queen had openly challenged a new royal directive tied directly to her children and the monarchy's future itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The meeting itself reportedly lasted less than 90 minutes, yet according to insiders familiar with the atmosphere inside Kensington Palace that afternoon, the tension in the room was unlike anything staff had witnessed in months. Senior royal advisors, constitutional experts, and private secretaries had quietly arrived through side entrances earlier that morning, avoiding the usual visibility that accompanies official palace discussions. Even within royal circles, the level of secrecy surrounding the gathering immediately raised alarm bells. Reports suggest aides were instructed not to log down. Silence, the conversation through normal palace administrative channels, an unusual move that only deepened speculation that something deeply personal and potentially explosive was unfolding behind closed doors. At the center of the alleged dispute were newly proposed official royal roll guidelines designed for the next generation of the monarchy. According to royal correspondence and palace whispers now circulating through London's media circles, the guidelines were intended to prepare Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis for expanded institutional responsibilities far earlier than previously expected. With King Charles continuing to battle ongoing health concerns and senior members of the monarchy facing mounting pressure to stabilize the crown's future, insiders claim palace strategists believed the younger royals needed to be shaped quickly, carefully, and publicly into symbols of continuity. But the reality behind those plans may have triggered a reaction few inside the institution anticipated. Because according to multiple interpretations of that private meeting, Catherine did not quietly accept the proposal. Instead, reports suggest she openly challenged ASP side of the plan, particularly those involving Charlotte and Louis. Insiders whisper that the Princess of Wales grew visibly emotional during discussions about rigid public expectations, carefully managed appearances, and long-term institutional preparation for the younger children. For years, Catherine has cultivated an image of calm discipline and unwavering loyalty to royal tradition. She understood the rules. She respected the system. But this time, something appears to have crossed a deeply personal line. Those close to palace operations claim Catherine's greatest fear centers around history repeating itself inside the monarchy. Specifically, the emotional burden long associated with being the spare. Royal watchers immediately drew parallels to the painful fractures between Prince William and Prince Harry, fractures that many believe began decades earlier during childhood pressures that were never publicly acknowledged at the time. Various interpretations of the palace strategy suggest Charlotte's future role was discussed with alarming specificity during the meeting, including expectations surrounding visibility, ceremonial duty, and long-term institutional positioning. And, if those reports are true, Catherine may have recognized a dangerous pattern beginning to form once again. What made the situation even more striking was the behavior of Prince William afterward. Several palace insiders claim the future king was later seen privately comforting Charlotte that same evening, away from public visibility and far removed from the carefully controlled world of royal appearances. Though no official statement was issued, royal correspondents insist tensions had been quietly building behind palace walls for months. Subtle changes in scheduling, unusual private family movements, and increasingly protective behavior surrounding the Wales children had already fueled speculation that disagreements were growing over how the next generation should be raised inside the monarchy. And yet the palace remained silent. No clarification, no denial. Only the familiar machinery of royal discretion moving swiftly behind the scenes while reporters, commentators, and insiders scrambled to piece together what had truly happened inside that meeting room. Because beneath the polished traditions and carefully rehearsed smiles, something far more serious now appeared to be emerging. A quiet but dangerous clash between modern parenthood and centuries of royal expectation. A clash that could ultimately reshape not only Catherine's role within the institution, but the future direction of the monarchy itself. But the disagreement was never just about parenting, it was about who truly controls the future of the House of Windsor. Behind the polished palace smiles and carefully staged appearances, insiders claim a confidential blueprint had already been drafted for the next royal generation. And according to reports, Catherine was horrified by what she discovered inside it. What began as whispers surrounding a tense private meeting inside Kensington Palace was now evolving into something far more serious. According to royal insiders, the disagreement was no longer limited to emotional concerns about parenting or temporary family tensions. Hidden beneath the surface was an alleged institutional plan, one quietly developed by senior advisors over many months, that could fundamentally reshape the lives of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis, long before they were old enough to fully understand the burden being placed upon them. And for Catherine, that realization reportedly changed everything. Sources familiar with palace discussions claim updated succession and duty guidelines had been circulating privately among senior royal staff since late last year. While the monarchy has always prepared future generations for public life, reports suggest these new proposals went much further than previous royal planning. Advisors allegedly argued that with King Charles continuing to face ongoing health challenges and public uncertainty surrounding the future stability of the crown, the younger royals needed to be prepared earlier, trained earlier, and integrated more aggressively into the machinery of the institution. The monarchy, according to some insiders, could no longer afford hesitation. But the reality behind those discussions appears to have awakened painful memories buried deep within royal history itself. Because according to palace correspondence, Catherine immediately recognized echoes of another generation. Another royal childhood shaped not by freedom, but by relentless preparation. Reports suggest comparisons were privately drawn to the upbringing of Prince William and Prince Harry, two brothers raised under rigid expectations to silence. The kind hat would later fracture in devastating and very public ways. For decades, royal tradition operated on an unspoken hierarchy. The heir carried the crown, while the spare existed to support the institution at any personal cost. And while the monarchy has modernized in many ways, insiders whisper that Catherine fears the emotional structure behind that system never truly disappeared. It merely evolved into something quieter, more controlled, and perhaps even more dangerous. At the center of Catherine's reported concern was Princess Charlotte. According to various interpretations of the confidential blueprint, discussions surrounding Charlotte's future role allegedly carried undertones that deeply unsettled the Princess of Wales. Palace sources claim Catherine became increasingly alarmed at the possibility that Charlotte could gradually inherit a modernized version of the spare position, a role historically associated with enormous pressure, emotional isolation, and impossible expectations. Royal insiders insist Catherine has spent years carefully studying the emotional collapse that unfolded between William and Harry, and she reportedly refuses to allow history to repeat itself with silence in her own family. What makes the situation even more complicated is the lingering shadow of Queen Elizabeth II's institutional philosophy. Throughout her reign, duty remained absolute. Personal discomfort, emotional struggle, even family fractures were often viewed as secondary to the survival of the crown. Those familiar with royal operations claim many senior advisors still operate under that same framework today. To them, preparation is protection, structure is stability, and emotional sacrifice, while unfortunate, is considered part of royal survival itself. But Catherine, according to reports, sees the issue differently. Palace insiders now describe her as deeply protective of her children's normalcy, determined to preserve as much emotional freedom as possible before institutional obligations begin to consume their lives permanently. That difference in philosophy is reportedly becoming impossible to ignore inside palace walls. On one side stand traditionalists who believe the monarchy survives only through discipline, hierarchy, and early conditioning. On the other stands Catherine, increasingly viewed as a modernizing force who believes emotional stability must come before silence, the kind institutional performance. And somewhere between those worlds is Prince William himself, future king, protective father, and a man who understands firsthand what happens when royal duty overwhelms personal identity. Reports suggest William privately shares many of Catherine's concerns, though insiders claim the pressure being placed upon him by senior palace figures has intensified dramatically in recent months. The palace, as always, continues to maintain silence, no confirmations, no denials, only carefully managed appearances masking what many royal correspondents now believe is a growing internal struggle over the monarchy's future direction. Because beneath the traditions, beneath the polished ceremonies and rehearsed unity, a far more dangerous question is quietly taking shape. Can the institution survive if the next generation refuses to sacrifice itself the way previous generations once did? As tensions escalated behind palace walls, another shocking divide quietly emerged, this time between Catherine and some of the monarchy's most powerful traditionalists. For years, Catherine was viewed as the monarchy's perfect modern diplomat, graceful, loyal, and careful never to challenge, silence the institution publicly. But insiders now claim that image shattered during one explosive internal dispute. Until now, the Princess of Wales had mastered something few royals ever truly achieve: balance. She carried tradition without appearing trapped by it. She projected stability without seeming cold. And perhaps most importantly, she understood how to protect the monarchy's image while quietly adapting it for a changing generation. That was why reports of a serious internal clash involving Catherine stunned palace observers so deeply. Because according to insiders, this was not a moment of emotional frustration or temporary disagreement. It was the beginning of a far larger battle unfolding inside the very core of the institution itself. Sources familiar with palace dynamics claim senior courtiers had grown increasingly concerned about the monarchy's long-term future following King Charles's ongoing health struggles. Behind closed doors, advisors reportedly argued that Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis needed to be conditioned earlier for public responsibility in order to preserve institutional continuity during uncertain times. The old guard within palace. Silence. A kind operations allegedly viewed emotional caution as dangerous hesitation. In their view, royal duty was never meant to wait for comfort. It was designed to shape identity from childhood itself. And according to palace whispers, several influential figures believed William and Catherine had already delayed that preparation too long. But Catherine reportedly saw the situation very differently. Insiders claim she became increasingly resistant to proposals involving heavier public exposure for Charlotte in particular. While George's future role as heir was already understood within the framework of the monarchy, reports suggest Catherine feared Charlotte could gradually become trapped within a carefully structured secondary role, one built around support, sacrifice, and quiet emotional compromise. Palace sources insist the Princess of Wales repeatedly questioned whether the institution had truly learned anything from the emotional damage inflicted on previous generations. And behind those concerns was one name the monarchy still struggles to escape: Prince Harry. For years, Harry's public resentment surrounding his position as the spare has haunted royal discussions, whether openly acknowledged, silence, or not. According to various interpretations of palace conversations, Catherine reportedly referenced the dangers of assigning lifelong identity roles to children before they are emotionally prepared to carry them. Royal insiders claim she viewed Harry's eventual fallout not as an isolated personal crisis, but as a warning sign of what happens when institutional expectation overtakes personal development. The fear, according to those close to the situation, was not simply about royal duty. It was about emotional survival. As tensions quietly escalated, insiders began whispering about an emerging divide inside the monarchy itself, one many now describe as the old guard versus the modern monarchy. On one side stood traditionalists deeply rooted in the institutional culture established during Queen Elizabeth II's reign, where duty remained sacred and emotional sacrifice was often viewed as necessary collateral for preserving the crown. On the other stood Catherine, increasingly perceived not merely as William's supportive partner, but as a defining influence over what the future monarchy could become: a softer monarchy, a more emotionally aware monarchy, one less willing to assume its youngest members in the name of tradition. That shift in perception reportedly unsettled some within palace circles. For years, Catherine had been admired precisely because she rarely disrupted royal order publicly. But now, according to insiders, advisors began recognizing that her influence over William, and eventually over the next reign itself, was becoming impossible to ignore. Reports suggest even Prince William found himself trapped between two worlds: loyalty to the institution he was born to protect, and loyalty to the family he was determined not to lose to that same institution. Those close to the future king claim the pressure on him intensified dramatically as palace tensions deepened behind the scenes. Meanwhile, speculation grew that King Charles himself had quietly urged unity amid the growing friction. Various interpretations of private conversations suggest Charles understood both sides of the conflict more than many realized. Having spent a lifetime balancing public duty against personal turmoil, insiders claim the king recognized the dangerous consequences of allowing these tensions to spiral further into public view. Yet even as efforts were reported, LY made to calm the situation, something much larger was already beginning to unfold beneath the surface. Because according to palace whispers, the real issue was no longer theoretical. The guidelines at the center of the dispute may not have been future proposals at all. They may have already contained detailed plans specifically designed for Charlotte herself. Yet the real crisis erupted when reports surfaced that the new guidelines may have already included specific plans for Charlotte herself. The moment Charlotte's name allegedly appeared in confidential palace planning documents, everything changed. According to insiders, that was the instant Catherine stopped quietly listening and started fighting back. Until that point, palace tensions had reportedly remained contained behind layers of royal discretion, private consultations, and carefully guarded conversations between advisors and senior family members. But insiders now claim the atmosphere shifted dramatically once Catherine realized the discussions were no longer hypothetical. According to various interpretations of the confidential proposals circulating within palace circles, Charlotte's future role inside the monarchy may have already been outlined in extraordinary detail, not years from now, not someday in the distant future, but now, quietly, systematically. And for Catherine, reports suggest that discovery struck at the center of every fear she had been carrying for months. Sources close to royal operations claim the alleged planning documents outlined expanded ceremonial expectations, future public responsibilities, media positioning strategies, and long-term institutional preparation connected specifically to Charlotte's role beside Prince George. While supporters of the proposals reportedly viewed the plans as practical preparation for the monarchy's future stability, others inside palace walls began quietly questioning whether the institution was once again assigning identity before childhood had even fully unfolded. And according to insiders, Catherine was among the loudest voices raising that concern privately. Because beneath the surface of royal duty lies something the monarchy has spent generations trying to control: pressure, relentless pressure. The kind that follows royal children into adulthood long before they understand what has been taken from them. Palace insiders whisper that Catherine became deeply alarmed by the possibility of Charlotte growing up beneath the same invisible emotional burden that haunted previous generations of royals. Not just public scrutiny, not just media obsession, but the lifelong expectation to sacrifice personal freedom in service of an institution that always demands more. Reports suggest Catherine feared Charlotte could slowly become trapped inside a role she never truly chose for herself. And perhaps most haunting of all were the parallels many royal commentators immediately began drawing to Prince Harry. For years, Harry's public struggles with identity, resentment, and institutional isolation have cast a long shadow across the House of Windsor. According to insiders, Catherine reportedly views those fractures not as distant scandals, but as warnings. Painful evidence of what happens when emotional well-being becomes secondary to royal structure. Palace sources claim she is determined to protect Charlotte and Louis from developing that same quiet sense of displacement that many believe followed Harry throughout his life inside the monarchy. Prince William, according to various palace whispers, is believed to support a far slower introduction to senior royal duties for all three children. Those close to the Prince of Wales claim he understands better than almost anyone the emotional cost attached to growing up under permanent institutional expectation. Reports suggest William has privately pushed for stronger boundaries between public royal life and private family life, especially as global media attention surrounding George, Charlotte, and Louis continues intensifying with every passing year. Yet balancing those protective instincts against centuries of royal tradition has reportedly placed enormous pressure on the future king himself. Meanwhile, public appearances involving Charlotte began attracting an entirely new level of scrutiny. Royal commentators, body language analysts, and tabloid insiders dissected every interaction, every expression, every moment beside her parents. Some claim Charlotte appeared increasingly composed and prepared for public life. Others argued the growing attention itself proved Catherine's fears were already becoming reality. Across British media, debate intensified over whether the monarchy's traditions were slowly becoming incompatible with modern expectations. Silence, the kind hounding childhood, mental health, and emotional protection. What once seemed like isolated palace disagreements had now evolved into a broader national conversation about the future of the royal family itself. And through it all, the palace remained silent. No official clarification, no direct response to the growing rumors. Only the familiar machinery of royal containment operating quietly behind the scenes, while speculation spread faster with every passing day. But according to insiders, that silence may have done more harm than good. Because without answers, the public vacuum quickly filled with fear, suspicion, and increasingly explosive theories about what was truly happening behind palace walls. Reports suggest even some senior royal staff became concerned the situation was no longer sustainable. The deeper the palace retreated into secrecy, the more intense the global fascination became. And while Catherine reportedly continued trying to shield her daughter from the growing storm privately, another threat was already emerging behind the scenes, one capable of exposing the entire conflict to the world in ways the monarchy could no longer control. But while Catherine tried protecting her daughter privately, another problem threatened to expose the entire conflict to the world. Then came the leak. One carefully buried internal disagreement suddenly exploded into a global royal controversy, and the palace was completely unprepared for the backlash that followed. At first, the reports appeared almost cautiously worded. Small mentions buried inside royal commentary columns. Quiet references to internal discussions surrounding the future roles of Prince William and Catherine's children. But within hours, the story began spreading across major media outlets with alarming speed. According to palace insiders, what had once been a tightly controlled disagreement behind closed doors suddenly became a full-scale public scandal after details surrounding the alleged next-generation royal planning leaked into the press. And once those whispers escaped the palace walls, there was no containing them anymore. Royal correspondents immediately began reporting claims of growing tensions between Catherine and senior palace advisors over the upbringing of Prince George, Princess Charlotte, and Prince Louis. Some outlets hinted at disagreements surrounding official royal duties, while others focused specifically on Charlotte's future position inside the monarchy. The palace, caught completely off guard by the scale of public attention, reportedly moved into immediate crisis management mode. Sources familiar with internal operations claim aides worked frantically behind the scenes to contain speculation before the story spiraled into something far more damaging. But the problem facing the monarchy was no longer simply the leak itself, it was the emotional narrative forming around it. Because almost instantly, anonymous insiders began suggesting that Catherine had directly opposed proposed institutional policies involving her children. Reports claim palace officials attempted to minimize those allegations privately, yet the silence from Kensington Palace only intensified public curiosity. Every refusal to comment became fuel for further speculation. Every carefully staged public appearance suddenly carried new meaning, and according to royal experts, the monarchy underestimated just how deeply this particular story would resonate with the public. Within days, social media erupted into fierce debate over Charlotte's future. Millions began questioning what silence, the kind ether the monarchy had truly evolved beyond the rigid structures that once defined previous royal generations. Commentators dissected old interviews, past royal tensions, and historical parallels with growing intensity. Some argued that preparing royal children early was necessary to preserve stability within the institution. Others believed the reports exposed something far darker, a system still willing to place duty above emotional well-being despite decades of public lessons and painful family fractures. But perhaps the most explosive comparisons involved Princess Diana. Across television panels, online discussions, and newspaper opinion columns, many began drawing direct parallels between Catherine's alleged resistance and Diana's own attempts to shield William and Harry from the harsher realities of royal life. The similarities proved impossible for the public to ignore. Diana had famously fought to give her sons moments of normalcy despite the crushing pressure surrounding the monarchy. Now, according to palace whispers, Catherine appeared to be fighting a remarkably similar battle decades later. And for many observers, that parallel transformed the entire scandal overnight. Silence, the kind Catherine was no longer viewed simply as a royal resisting institutional planning. She was increasingly seen as a mother trying to protect her children from the same emotional machinery that once fractured the royal family itself. Public sympathy toward the Princess of Wales grew rapidly. Even longtime critics of the monarchy found themselves defending her position, arguing that emotional protection should never be sacrificed in service of royal tradition. Meanwhile, insiders claim frustration within palace walls intensified as blame quietly spread between competing factions. According to royal commentators, trust between senior advisors, private staff, and members of the Wales household may now be severely damaged. Some insiders reportedly feared the leak itself could only have come from someone deeply embedded within palace operations, a possibility that introduced an entirely new layer of paranoia and instability behind the scenes. As headlines multiplied internationally, the institution found itself trapped in an increasingly dangerous cycle. The more the palace attempted to suppress the story, the more attention it received. Every unanswered question created 3 more. Every Saturday, silence deepened suspicion. And somewhere beneath the chaos, insiders claim Catherine and William were becoming increasingly isolated as pressure mounted from every direction at once: family expectations, media obsession, institutional loyalty, and public sympathy colliding in ways the monarchy could no longer fully control. Then came the realization that frightened palace officials most of all. This was no longer just a family disagreement. It had become a referendum on the future identity of the monarchy itself. And as public pressure intensified by the hour, there was one figure at the center of the institution who could no longer remain distant from the crisis unfolding around him. And as the headlines spiraled out of control, attention quietly turned toward one man who could no longer avoid stepping in: King Charles III. Already weakened by illness and mounting pressures, King Charles suddenly found himself trapped in an impossible position. Defend the institution he waited a lifetime to lead, or side with the future queen protecting her children? As the controversy surrounding Catherine and the alleged royal planning documents intensified, pressure inside Buckingham Palace reported silence, the kind tieredly reached levels not seen in years. According to royal insiders, King Charles had initially hoped the growing tensions between palace advisors and the Wales household could be handled quietly, far from the scrutiny of headlines and public debate. But once the story escaped into the global media, the crisis transformed into something much larger than a private family disagreement. It became a question of leadership, a question of stability, and perhaps most dangerously of all, a question about whether the monarchy itself was beginning to fracture from within during one of the most vulnerable periods of Charles's reign. Sources familiar with palace operations claim the king responded to the escalating situation by privately urging calm, discretion, and unity among all sides. Those close to the monarch reportedly describe him as deeply concerned by the speed at which internal disagreements had become public spectacle. For decades, the royal family survived crises through one central principle: never allow division to appear stronger than the institution itself. But according to palace whispers, that strategy was becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The more the palace said to project stability, the more the public seemed to sense something far more serious unfolding beneath the surface. And at the heart of the crisis stood William and Catherine, whose influence within the monarchy had quietly grown stronger than ever before. Royal commentators now describe the Prince and Princess of Wales not simply as future leaders, but as the emotional center of the monarchy's next era. Public support surrounding the couple remained remarkably strong despite the controversy, and insiders claim many within palace circles recognized that reality immediately. That growing influence reportedly shifted the balance of power behind closed doors in ways that unsettled certain traditionalists inside the institution. Because for the first time in years, the monarchy's future direction appeared increasingly tied not to inherited protocol alone, but to William and Catherine's vision of what royal life should become. That vision, however, was reportedly dividing the palace itself. According to insiders, factions began quietly forming around 2 competing ideas of monarchy. One side believed modernization had already gone too far and feared weakening royal structure could stabilize the institution permanently. The other believed the survival of the monarchy depended on evolving emotionally as well as institutionally. Behind closed doors, those differences allegedly created growing tension between advisors loyal to traditional royal conditioning and figures more aligned with Catherine's protective approach toward her children. And caught directly in the middle was King Charles, a monarch shaped by duty, but also a father who understood the devastating emotional cost that duty can sometimes demand. In fact, several royal experts now believe Charles may have understood Catherine's concerns far more deeply than many initially assumed. Reports suggest the king privately acknowledged the emotional risks attached to imposing rigid institutional roles too early on young royals, having endured decades of intense public scrutiny himself, alongside years of family turmoil involving both Diana and Harry. Insiders claim Charles recognized the danger of allowing emotional fractures to deepen within the next generation. Yet at the same time, he reportedly feared that appearing to side too strongly against traditional palace structures could trigger even greater stability during an already fragile period for the crown. That impossible balancing act reportedly led to a series of private discussions behind closed doors, where palace aides and senior family members allegedly explored possible compromises. Sources whisper that conversations may have included delaying certain public expectations for Charlotte and Louis, reducing immediate institutional planning, and granting William and Catherine greater control over how their children gradually enter royal life. But according to insiders, reaching consensus proved extraordinarily difficult, because beneath every discussion lingered a deeper fear few inside the monarchy were willing to say aloud. The institution itself was beginning to lose control of its own public narrative, and that fear was growing rapidly. Royal experts warned that if tensions continued escalating publicly, trust in the monarchy could suffer lasting damage. Public confidence depends heavily on the image of unity, continuity, and emotional stability surrounding the royal family. But now, headlines increasingly focused on secrecy, internal division, and generational conflict. The institution that once symbolized permanence suddenly appeared vulnerable, uncertain, and emotionally exposed in ways rarely seen before. And for King Charles, whose reign had already been overshadowed by health struggles and ongoing family tensions, the timing could not have been worse. Yet beneath the politics, the strategy meetings, and the public relations panic, insiders increasingly believed Catherine's resistance was rooted in something far more personal than palace officials fully understood. Because according to those closest to the situation, her fears were not truly about royal scheduling, public appearances, or ceremonial duty at all. They were about pain, old pain, generational pain, the kind that leaves scars long after the headlines disappear. But the deeper truth behind Catherine's resistance may have had less to do with royal duty and far more to do with painful lessons from the past. According to royal insiders, one memory continues to haunt every decision William and Catherine make for their children. The devastating emotional toll royal life once took on Princess Diana and her sons. Long before the current palace tensions erupted into public controversy, those closest to Prince William reportedly understood. Silence, the kind odd that his approach to fatherhood had been shaped by something far deeper than royal tradition. It was shaped by loss, by trauma. By watching, in real time, what relentless public pressure and institutional rigidity did to his mother. According to insiders, William has spent much of his adult life trying to reconcile two identities that often seem impossible to balance: future king and protective father. And now, as scrutiny surrounding George, Charlotte, and Louis intensifies, palace sources claim that internal struggle is becoming impossible for him to ignore any longer. For William, the shadow of Princess Diana never fully disappeared from royal life. Her pain, her isolation, and her complicated relationship with the institution remain woven into the emotional fabric of the monarchy itself. Reports suggest William privately fears that the same machinery which once overwhelmed his mother could eventually consume his children if stronger boundaries are not established early. Insiders claim that concern has only deepened following years of public family fractures involving Prince Harry, whose explosive departure from royal life forced the monarchy to confront uncomfortable questions it had spent decades avoiding. Questions about emotional survival, about identity, about what happens when royal duty begins erasing the individual beneath it. According to palace whispers, Catherine shares those fears intensely. Sources close to the Wales household describe the Princess of Wales as fiercely protective of emotional stability within her family, particularly as global fascination surrounding her children grows stronger with each passing year. While she continues to carry out royal responsibilities with discipline and composure publicly, insiders claim Catherine has become increasingly determined behind closed doors to preserve as much normalcy as possible for George, Charlotte, and Louis before institutional expectations permanently reshape their lives. And according to those familiar with palace discussions, it is Charlotte's position within the royal hierarchy that troubles her most deeply. because internally, many reportedly view Harry's public fallout as the clearest warning sign of the emotional dangers surrounding the spare dynamic. For generations, the monarchy relied on a structure that gave absolute clarity to succession but often left secondary figures, struggling to define themselves outside institutional purpose. Royal commentators now argue that Harry's years of resentment exposed cracks within that system that can no longer be ignored. And according to insiders, Catherine believes those lessons must be taken seriously before history repeats itself through another generation. Reports suggest she has repeatedly emphasized that Charlotte deserves an identity beyond ceremonial duty and inherited expectation, a future shaped not only by the crown, but by personal freedom and emotional security as well. That growing philosophy appears to be gaining public support at remarkable speed. Across Britain and beyond, many now believe the monarchy can only survive if it evolves emotionally alongside modern society. Public conversations surrounding mental health, childhood privacy, and family well-being have changed dramatically over the last 2 decades, and according to royal experts, younger generations increasingly expect the royal family to reflect those values. The image of royal children raised under crushing institutional discipline no longer inspires admiration in the way it once did. Instead, it raises concern, sympathy, even fear. Silence, the kind, and in the middle of that cultural shift, Catherine has emerged as a powerful symbol of a different kind of monarchy, one rooted not only in duty, but in emotional awareness. But not everyone inside palace walls reportedly welcomes that transformation. Palace traditionalists have increasingly been accused of resisting change, fearing that too much emotional flexibility could weaken the structure that has preserved the monarchy for centuries. According to insiders, some believe Catherine's approach risks creating uncertainty around royal expectations and succession discipline. Yet others argue the opposite, that refusing to adapt could ultimately cause even greater long-term damage to the institution. Those divisions now appear deeper than ever, with factions inside the monarchy quietly battling over what the crown should represent in the modern era. And standing directly at the center of that transformation is Catherine herself. Once viewed primarily as the monarchy's stabilizing figure, she is now increasingly framed by royal observers as someone reshaping the institution from within, not through rebellion, not through public confrontation, but through a quieter, far more powerful silence to the emotional traditions that have defined royal life for generations. Reports suggest that shift is already influencing how the monarchy approaches its future heirs, even as internal resistance continues behind closed doors. Now, with tensions still simmering behind palace walls, insiders believe the monarchy may already be entering a completely new era. The real battle inside Kensington Palace was never simply about guidelines or royal schedules. It was about the future identity of the monarchy itself and whether the next generation would inherit duty, freedom, or both. By the time the controversy surrounding Catherine, William, and the alleged royal planning documents reached its peak, many insiders had already begun quietly acknowledging a truth the palace could no longer fully contain. The monarchy was changing, not through dramatic public declarations or constitutional reform, but through something far more subtle and far more powerful, a generational shift unfolding behind palace walls in real time. And standing at the center of that transformation was Catherine, a woman once praised for seamlessly adapting herself to royal tradition, now increasingly viewed as silence, the kind he figure most responsible for challenging how that tradition survives into the future. According to royal commentators, the Princess of Wales has gradually become more than simply the future queen beside William. She has become a defining force in shaping what the monarchy may eventually represent for a new era. Calm but determined, loyal yet quietly resistant when it comes to protecting her children. Palace insiders claim Catherine's growing influence has altered conversations surrounding everything, from public appearances to succession preparation and emotional well-being inside the royal household. What began as private concerns about Charlotte's future role reportedly evolved into a much larger philosophical doubt about whether the crown can continue demanding the same sacrifices from future generations that it demanded from the past. And increasingly, William appears fully aligned beside her. Reports suggest the Prince and Princess of Wales are now viewed within palace circles as architects of a more emotionally balanced monarchy, one attempting to preserve tradition without allowing it to overwhelm the humanity of the family living inside it. Those close to the couple claim Silence, the kind they remain deeply committed to royal duty, but equally determined to avoid repeating the emotional fractures that have haunted the House of Windsor for decades. That balancing act, however, may become the defining challenge of William's future reign. Because while public support for their approach continues growing, resistance from traditionalist factions inside the institution reportedly remains very real. At the heart of those tensions remains Princess Charlotte herself. Even now, questions continue swirling about what her eventual place within the monarchy will truly become. Will she inherit a modernized role built around independence and emotional freedom? Or will the ancient gravitational pull of royal hierarchy slowly shape her life the same way it shaped generations before her? Royal experts argue the answer may determine far more than Charlotte's future alone. It may reveal whether the monarchy is genuinely capable of evolving beyond the structures that once created some of its deepest internal wounds. And according to insiders, that uncertainty continues fueling quiet anxiety behind palace walls despite every effort to project calm publicly. Meanwhile, public opinion silence, the kind ours to be shifting more decisively than ever. Across Britain and internationally, growing numbers of people now believe modernization is no longer optional for the monarchy's survival. The public increasingly expects emotional authenticity alongside royal duty, compassion alongside ceremony, humanity alongside tradition. Catherine's reported determination to protect her children from excessive institutional pressure has resonated deeply with audiences who see echoes of Diana's struggles still lingering across royal history. For many observers, this is no longer simply a royal controversy. It has become a symbolic battle between preserving tradition and protecting future generations from its harsher consequences. But palace insiders warn the conflict itself is far from over. According to reports, tensions between modernizers and traditionalists continue simmering privately beneath the carefully managed surface of royal life. While compromises may have been discussed behind closed doors, the deeper philosophical divide remains unresolved. Some within the institution reportedly fear that relaxing traditional structures could weaken the monarchy's authority over time. Others believe ceasing to evolve emotionally could ultimately alienate the very public support the crown depends upon to survive. And hanging over all of it is King Charles, whose reign increasingly appears defined not by stability alone, but by this extraordinary generational transition unfolding around him. Because in the end, this story was never really about leaked documents, palace meetings, or carefully drafted guidelines. It was about legacy, about whether the monarchy can protect itself without sacrificing the emotional well-being of those born inside it, about whether duty and humanity can finally coexist after generations of conflict between the two. Catherine's resistance, whether public or private, appears to have forced the institution to confront questions it spent decades avoiding. Painful questions, necessary questions, and perhaps for the first time in modern royal history, those questions are no longer being whispered only behind palace walls, they are being asked openly by the world watching outside them. Because behind the palace gates, beneath centuries of tradition and silence, one truth now echoes louder than ever. The future of the crown may ultimately depend on whether his silence, the kind Ori is finally allowed to change. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in the next one.